And he took us into the technologist booth, and he showed us on a screen. He said, Hannah has a brain tumor.
And as a dad, the air just went out of my lungs.
The biopsy showed that Hannah's tumor was a grade 4 glioblastoma. That is typically a terminal diagnosis.
She said, Dad, I've got to tell you something. I prayed for a storm that God might use me.
Brad and Jill, thank you so much for being here and for talking with us and being willing to share your story. Could you tell us a little bit about Hannah?
Yes, Hannah was our oldest of two daughters. I was her high school principal, so I spent a lot of time with her. I was with her um, 7 days a week, so to speak, a night and day, she loved school, and she even loved her dad being the principal most of the time.
Most of the time.
Yeah, but but she loved being a part of all of our family activities, being around her cousins and her aunts and uncles, and she was very involved in church. She loved her youth group, and she went on mission trips, and she made her dad and mom proud on so many levels. Just a good student, straight A's. As her principal, she never made a B.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
I did not know
so that was I was proud of her for that, and she had a desire to be the valedictorian. So, and so she just loved school and loved family.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then on Valentine's Day of 2008, she woke up with just a severe headache and sick to her stomach, and figured it was a bug, sent her back to bed, let her stay home from school that day. And she woke up later that afternoon, and she felt fine. So we thought, well, she's all better. But the next morning it happened again. She woke up again, severe headache, sick to her stomach, and that actually went on for a few days. And of course, we became concerned. You really, you know, um, wanted to get her into the doctor, but she didn't want to miss school. She said, I'm fine, it's fine. She went back to school, and she called me from school, and she said, my head, still having some headaches and all of that. She says, but something's going on with my vision. She says, it's like I have double vision. And when she said that, I was alarmed. I said, let's get you into the doctor. So we got her an appointment for the next morning, and got her to the doctor, and they examined her and really couldn't see anything wrong with her, couldn't figure out what was going on. But because she had these vision things happening, they wanted to refer her to an ophthalmologist. And that ophthalmologist just happened to be somebody that we had gone to college with. We didn't even know he was practicing as an ophthalmologist, but that's who we were referred to. And took her into his office and kind of got reacquainted with him. He was actually somebody we had known in college who had sung in our wedding, and we had lost track of him through the years. So, kind of reestablished that relationship, and he examined her and really couldn't see what was going on either. And he said, if it was my daughter, I would want her to have an MRI. And so we said, sure. He scheduled us for an MRI the very next morning, and we went in for that MRI, and we all three went in. The MRI was kind of in the afternoon. And as the principal, he kind of felt like he needed to get home in time to be there for the buses to run. We were in two vehicles. So, and you don't expect to get MRI results the same day that you get them. You figure it's going to be a day or two before you find out the results. And so he went on to school and they did the MRI. And before it was over, the MRI technician actually came out of her booth and she offered me two tickets, free tickets to go have lunch in the hospital cafeteria. And she said, I just want you all to go down and have lunch in the cafeteria and then come back by here before you leave. And, it was apparent they were trying to stall us, didn't really want us to leave. Of course, I wasn't really thinking that way at the time. I thought, well, this is odd. But when the MRI was over, she once again handed me those tickets and said, I'd love for you to go down to the cafeteria, have lunch, come back by when you're done. So we did. Went and ate lunch in the cafeteria. That mom radar you have that something is going on here, something doesn't seem right. I was feeling that, but I thought, well, maybe they just need to check and make sure everything turned out. And we came back by the radiologist booth and we sat down and she kind of set us down and she said, your ophthalmologist called and he's on his way over. He'd like to talk with you about the results of the scan. And so then I knew something was wrong. And he came in just a few minutes later. And again, I'm so glad we already knew Tommy. We already had this relationship with him. And he took us into the technologist booth and he showed us on a screen. He said, Hannah has a brain tumor. And we were able to look at it right then. He said, I don't know what our next step is going to be, but I know she needs to get to Children's Hospital. We can send you all tonight. I can call ahead and they'll be prepared for you. Or if you want to go home and spend one more night at home, kind of get your things together, I'll have them prepared to meet you there in the morning, first thing. And so, I said, oh, we'd like to go home and go tomorrow. And he said, okay, that's fine. And he was so kind. He actually prayed with us. He walked us out a back door of the hospital, walked us to the car, offered to drive us home. And I said, no, I can drive. And both Hannah and I are kind of crying and not knowing what was going on at this point, but started driving home. And I called him and I just said, I need you to come home. And that's all I could say. And I just hung up the phone because I just couldn't speak anymore.
So
He met us at home when we pulled in the driveway.
when I got the call, I came home immediately, and I was waiting in the driveway when Hannah and Jill pulled in, and I could see in their eyes that there was something going on. And Hannah got out of the car and she looked me in the eyes and she said, Dad, I've got a brain tumor. And as a dad, the air just went out of my lungs. What do I do? As a dad, how am I going to fix this? And I started thinking that immediately. And we called our neighbor, who's a retired pastor, Brother Gerald Taylor, and he came over and we shared with him the news, and he prayed with us, and he gave us a verse, Nahum 1:7. The Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. And we made that decision. God, we trust you. And that started to shape our path with this journey with Hannah's brain tumor immediately. God, we trust you. And so I remember us praying together as a family as well. And we said, God, we don't like this. We don't understand what's going on, but we trust you. And we truly did start feeling that peace that passes all understanding, that Philippians 4:7 peace. We started feeling that peace immediately. And I really have never felt that before until then. And we didn't like the news. We started sharing with our family what was going on, but we had a deep down peace. And that was just God gave us that peace. And so we were in Children's Hospital the next morning and met with a surgeon and started making plans as he started making plans for surgery. And we just continued the path that we were on.
So she had surgery just a few days after we were admitted to the hospital. And it was, as brain surgeries go, it wasn't exceptionally long, 5 or 6 hours maybe. They were able to go in. It's a very scary thing to send your child in for brain surgery because you just don't know if they're going to be the same person when they come out. But we were so blessed and fortunate. They were able to go in and get the tumor without causing any damage while they were in there. And so the Hannah that came out of the operating room that day was still our Hannah. She had some very mild things, but other than that, you really couldn't even tell she had had surgery. We were in the hospital for a few days after that, and we were released to go home, but we knew that that tumor was being sent off for biopsy, and we would be returning to find out the results. And just a few days after we got home, we came back to the hospital to get the biopsy results. And we walked into the room, and there was our surgeon and another doctor and some other people in the room who we figured out later were counselors because they didn't know how we were about to respond to the news we were going to get. Our surgeon talked to us about some post-op stuff and no big deal. And then he introduced us to the other physician in the room who was an oncologist. And he told us that the biopsy showed that Hannah's tumor was a grade 4 glioblastoma brain tumor. He told us at that time that that is typically a terminal diagnosis. That also does typically occur in older people. And here was our 16-year-old daughter. And he said, she's healthy otherwise. She's young. We're going to do radiation, chemotherapy, and we're going to try to beat this. And so that embarked us on a year-long journey of radiation and chemo and all of those things. And it was very much a roller coaster journey, as all cancer journeys are. She actually did very well for about 7 months. She had an MRI every 2 months, and every time it was all clear, all clear. And so we thought, we're going to beat this thing. She's going to be the one that beats this. And but about September of that year, she had started her junior year of high school. Going to school, even in the midst of all these treatments and things, and because she still was set on being the valedictorian, that was her goal, and but she began to have some of the same symptoms she had at the beginning, things that were eerily similar to what we had seen at the start, and so we called Children's and we said, something seems to be going on. We may need to bring her in for a scan a little sooner than we planned. She had just had her last MRI 6 weeks previously, and it was all clear. They said, sure, bring her in and we'll scan her. So we brought her in. They did the scan, and it showed that the cancer had returned, and it had come back on her brain stem and all up and down her spine. So many tumors on her spine that they actually called them snowdrift tumors. So there's no surgery we can do at this point. There's just too much going on. But they did another kind of radiation, a full body radiation. They started a new kind of chemo, an IV chemo this time. But she really never recovered from that point on. And she went to heaven on February 26th of 2009. But Brad had a really, really neat conversation with her kind of early on in her journey that we love to share.
Yeah. And it really did kind of really gave us direction in this journey. And it gave us a peace, really. A more peace. God had given us peace, but this gave us a more sense of peace that God had her, and we were in waiting on surgery a couple of days from surgery, and Hannah was trying to go to sleep late in the evening. She said, "Dad, I've got to tell you something," and she went on to tell me about a few months prior we had a weekend retreat at our church with the youth. And at that retreat, the leaders shared with her and the youth how God allows storms in your life to bring you closer to Him and also to allow others to see Him through your storm. And she went on to explain to me, she said, Dad, our waters have been calm. We hadn't had any storms, but I want you and Mom to know that I prayed for a storm that God might use me. Mm-hmm. And that was a comfort. That God was preparing her for this journey and was walking with her. And we felt immediately we didn't want to waste this storm. We wanted to use it. And that's what, as from that day forward, we were thinking that direction of how can we use this to bring others closer and to allow others to see our Lord through her storm.
Yeah, and we don't believe that when she prayed for a storm that God's answer to that prayer was to give her cancer. But we know that God is sovereign and he knew what was to come in her life. So her praying that prayer was, I believe, his preparation for her. So that when she found out, a couple of weeks after that she had cancer, she accepted that storm with grace and without fear. And that was not our typical Hannah. Hannah was what some might call a worrywart. Typically, she would worry about, if there was bad weather coming, she'd worry there was going to be a tornado. If she got a 95 on a test instead of a 100, she thought, oh no, I'm not going to be the valedictorian anymore. She was that kind of kid. But God, I believe that God gives kids with cancer a special grace. And he did that for her. She, from that point on, of all of the things that went on in her life, she never questioned. She never said, why me? She was never angry. She dealt with it much better than we did,
Yes.
I would say. But that story of her praying for a storm did help us as we were going through it, seeing that God had purpose in it. It was not just some random thing that was happening, that he was in control.
And something that as we look back, throughout that year of treatment and scans, and we would get bad news, and she would see that we were not handling it well, and we were emotional, and she would look at us as she said, Mom and Dad, I'm okay. I'm good. And that didn't come from her. That was God in her. And God was giving her that peace and giving her what she needed in the storm.
Such a powerful story.
It was her prayer that God would use her story and her storm to draw others close. It brought her dad close. I'm not the same person. It changed my perspective on everything. And for that, I'm grateful.
And of course, we prayed for healing. Our desire was for her to be healed here on earth and to be fully restored, to the Hannah that we knew. We believe she was healed. She was not healed in the way that we would have chosen, but she is fully healed now. She is perfectly and completely healed. We often have wondered, she wanted her story to be told. She wanted her story to make a difference. We wondered if that miracle had happened and she had been healed, she had received earthly healing. People would have said, wow, that's amazing. God really answered that prayer. God healed her of terminal cancer. And, people would have been impressed by that for a while, but then they would have gone on with their lives and forgotten all about it. Or people would have said, well, okay, well, maybe it wasn't really glioblastoma. Maybe it wasn't terminal cancer to begin with. It's very easy to dismiss a miracle. And because she didn't receive that earthly healing, the impact of her life, I believe, is much greater than it would have been otherwise. Now, we wish she was here with us. We would give all of that up, to have her here with us, no doubt. But since that's not an option, we are thankful for the eternal healing she has received, and the fact that God has been able to use her story to help others.
Yes. Her storm that she prayed for
Yes.
became your storm.
Yes.
And through your storm as well as hers, this ministry exists and is touching so many people.
Something else that we really had to grapple with was the sovereignty of God. And, we read scripture in Psalms 139. God knew her days before one day ever came to be. And do we believe that? And we do.
Mm-hmm.
and we can trust God with that. Her purpose was fulfilled in the 17 years plus that God gave her. My purpose, God's purpose for me, is not done. And we want to live well, as we talk a lot about in while we're waiting. We want to live well while we're waiting. We want to be obedient to do what God has called us to do, to fulfill His purpose for us.
Mm-hmm.
And she will be there when Christ meets you and
That's
says,
right.
"Well done, good and
Yeah.
faithful servant."
Yeah, boy, I look forward to that day. Can't wait.
I was just thinking that if it weren't for Hannah, when our Tristan left, we would not have half the comfort that
No.
we've received
Yeah.
because you guys walked this road first.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, we're grateful,
Mm-hmm.
because getting to meet you has helped us.
Yeah, that's right.
And as we both walk this journey,
Every bereaved parent we meet, we learn something from. You know, we're at the time that we're recording this, we're 14 years down the journey, but we meet parents sometimes that are much newer on this road than we are, and we still can learn from them. It's just the grace of God. Mm-hmm.
and I think that's something that encouraged us in our journey, is to think about people that were out in front of us.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And early on, we met a couple that were 28 years out. And we looked at them and we said, wow, they're still standing.
You may remember in the early weeks and months after Tristan went to heaven, at least for me, I would look at people that were a year or 2 years down the road, and I would look at them and I would just think, they are surviving. They're still alive. And I've seen them laugh, and maybe there's hope for me. I mean, I couldn't even imagine being a year out, 6 months out, a year out, 3 years out, 5 years out, and now here we are 14 years out. But that gave me hope to be able to look at others that were ahead of us. One of the concepts we talk about sometimes with While We're Waiting is the idea of drafting. You think about NASCAR drivers, a car will draft behind another, or in a bicycle race, or even geese, migrating geese, they form that V formation because they're drafting behind someone else. And there were other bereaved parents that were ahead of us on our journey that we were able to look at and say, okay, they're surviving, they're living well. And we would draft behind them, to just kind of use them as a model to see that we could do it. And now we've had people that have drafted behind us, and then those people have people that are drafting behind them. And it's just pretty cool how God makes that happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a blessing.
Yeah, I remember, when you were talking about looking at couples 3 years out, just thinking, how are they doing that? I don't think unless you've lost a child, you have no idea what that means.
And we really sought others out early on in our journey. And God, we look back and look to see the people God had put in our lives. I worked as an educator. I worked with a couple that lost a 6-month-old, and it just to watch them. And I remember asking the Smiths, Mark and Jeannie, how are you doing this? Because I was struggling, because I work with them, I go to church with them. And I said, how are you doing this? And they said, it's only God. And I remembered that. When Hannah went to heaven, guess who I called? Mark and Jeannie. I wanted to talk to them. I wanted to spend more time with them. Another couple too, same thing.
Yeah.
Because they were out in front of us. And we saw how they were going forward. And for them to tell us God is our answer, we can trust Him. Just keep going forward. Keep holding on to what you know is true.
Yeah.
Don't let the enemy lie to you, because that happens a lot.
It does. Let's unpack that for a bit.
Uh-huh.
Let's try to give somebody who's never lost a child a sense of what is it like that first year after you've lost a child, because you guys have counseled so many people. You must see lots of patterns and hear the same kinds of things. What are those common things that you see in somebody else's life, or that they should expect that first year? I mean, just the sense of grief, the gravity of the grief that you are enduring.
I would say it's deeper than you would have ever imagined possible. It's more profoundly life-changing than you ever imagined possible. I used to think that someone who had lost a child was just really, really sad for 3 months or 6 months or maybe even a year, but eventually just kind of got over it and moved on, and things would go back to normal. And, there is no back to normal after the loss of a child. Your world is completely rocked. Everything has changed. And I had no idea about that and how it's from now on. Hannah died when she was 17. And so from that point on, she was a junior in high school. We had to go through graduation, all the things, prom, graduation, all of her friends going off to college, all of her friends getting married, now all of her friends having babies. And she's like, wow, how different would our lives be if Hannah was here? She'd be turning 32 next month. And, she left us when she was 17. So she would be an adult woman now. She was just on the cusp of when your child goes from being your kid to being your friend. They do reach that point as they become adults. And so we think of all those things that we missed out on her or missed out on with her. Now, she's not missing anything.
No.
She's got everything, but we miss her. And I said, we would think that people would move on. That's what we thought, that people would move on. We've learned now that you don't move on. You don't move on at all. And something we talk about often at our retreats is we don't move on, but we can move forward. We can move forward. There's a difference. Hannah's in our past, for sure. But our future with her is so much more than what our past was. So as we move forward through life, we're not getting farther from her. We're getting closer to her. Our time separated from her is becoming less all the time as we move forward. And that gives us hope. That's what keeps us moving forward. We haven't moved on. We're not going to move on. But we are moving forward, knowing that we're not moving farther away, we're moving closer. So that helps. I had no idea how the depth of grief affected relationships with others. That our friends and our family members no longer understood us. They were there for us during Hannah's cancer journey. That's one thing about a long journey. People were there for us, and, people would bring food to our house, and people would visit us in the hospital and all of those things. And after Hannah went to heaven, that continued for a little while, and then it fell away. People went back to their regular lives. And we're still stuck in this just crater that's left behind after she's gone, and just trying to gain our feet again and trying to parent our surviving daughter through that, who now has gone from having a best friend, a sister, to being an only child with parents who are completely different parents than we were before she went to heaven. So those are all things that are so difficult to navigate. And as everybody else kind of goes back to their regular lives, you can feel very isolated and alone and not understood anymore. The other thing is, as a bereaved parent, and we experienced this some when Hannah was diagnosed with cancer, because suddenly we were thrown into a world where we were fighting for our child's life. And so the mundane things that people tend to talk about, the small talk and things like that, was no longer something we were interested in. And then especially after she died, we wanted to talk about things of eternal significance. That's all we wanted to talk about. And to go to, I don't know, just a gathering with friends, or to watch a ball game with a group, or even in our Sunday school class, where we are talking about things of eternal significance, we still were on such a different plane than everyone else. And so it's very isolating. Our family was wonderful, yet they, after the crisis with the cancer and after Hannah went to heaven, they all went back home to where their lives basically picked up where they had been before. And so even our closest family, as wonderful as they were and as much as they tried to be there for us, they couldn't understand what it was like living day to day with that empty bedroom in our house, and every day taking out 3 plates for dinner instead of 4. Those are the things where the rubber meets the road that nobody outside of your household understands, as much as they try to, and as much as they mean well. They can't understand those things.
Yeah, and I would encourage those that are new in this journey, just keep going forward. You know, if we by not going forward, the opposite is good to go backwards, and that's not a good option. We identified early on that we're in a spiritual battle.
That's true.
The enemy is going to make us think it was our fault. We could have done something different. We should have, could have
gone to a different hospital, tried a different treatment.
But we have to identify the enemy and realize where it's coming from, because that's going to get us off track. That might even get us going backwards, and that's not healthy. The depth of the pain that first year, where you felt the grief and manifest in not able to take a deep breath at times. Just there's a lot of things that we relate to grief. Our not being as sharp. Not that I'm the sharpest guy.
Right.
Around.
But you're duller than you used to be.
Yes. And
grief brain is real.
But what I would encourage those that are new in this is that that comes back. It gets better.
Yeah.
You're not going to be where you were at. If you choose to go forward and you choose to focus on the right thing, and we believe that you focus on God and His Word, that helps you to go forward. And sometimes you're not running.
Yeah.
You're just leaning.
Yeah. You may not even be able to take a step.
You just need to lean forward.
But if you could just lean forward
and just lean into it, And but what I would encourage people is that it gets better with God. It gets better
with God, and with a lot of time. I remember thinking, okay, once we get past this first year and we've done all the firsts and we've been through all the milestones and all that, surely it'll get better. For a lot of people, and talking with lots of bereaved parents, many say that the second year is worse than the first, because you kind of expect the first year to be bad and then you think the second year is going to be better. I wouldn't say for me personally, I can't speak for Brad, I don't think the second year was worse, but I don't really think it was better either. It takes so much more time than you ever would have imagined, and really it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime of missing your child. Not that it's going to be the same intensity for your lifetime. For me, I do think the intensity of the second year was less. And I think sometimes as bereaved parents, we have to give ourselves permission to heal. There's an Anthony Guthrie quote, and I may not say it exactly like she does, but she says, "My love for my child is not defined by the depth of my misery." So we can, as we begin to heal, and I don't think we fully heal till we get to heaven. I don't. But I do think we gradually heal as we move forward. as we begin to heal, we'll start to notice that maybe our loss is not the first thought we have when we wake up in the morning, or we might realize that we have more better days than bad days. Not that we don't go backwards sometimes, that we go right back into that stretch of bad days. That's when you begin to see little glimpses that maybe a little bit of healing is coming. When you do have those really bad days, maybe you don't go quite as far down. Always knowing that grief is, 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, 6 steps forward, 4 steps back. It's back and forth. Those stages of grief, throw all that out. Because the stages of grief make it sound like it's a linear process. You finish one, you go on to the next one, you go on to the next one, and if sometime you're going to come out the other end and it's going to be over. I wish it was like that, but it's not over. It's more like, I read in one book, and I wish I could tell you which one, but I don't. I've read lots of books, that grief is more like a spiral staircase. That as you go along, you keep going through those same stages over and over, but as you get farther up the staircase, you see them through a different perspective than you did when you were lower on the staircase. And so that may be encouraging for some folks to think about it that way, rather than a straight shot.
I think it's so important that you said you have to give yourself permission to grieve.
Yes,
Because other people are not going to give you that permission.
exactly.
That's right.
And you're going to feel pressured
Yep.
to fall under what they expect you to do.
Yeah.
And I remember many times feeling pressured. I just went and did something because I knew there was an expectation there, and I wish I just said, I don't care. I'm just going to do what I feel like I need to do.
Right.
Because you have to write your own grief book.
That's right.
You can't read another book on grief. You've got your own book to write, and it's different for everybody because you're a different kind of person.
Yep.
You have a different kind of loss and a different kind of journey.
Right. And my grief book is going to be different from his grief book.
That's right.
And we have
Even
to be
though
able
you
to
lost
give
the
each
same
other
child.
Same child, but we each have a different relationship with her. I have a relationship as a mother to a daughter. He had a relationship as a father to a daughter. Very different. And so we have to be able to give each other grace to grieve the way we need to. For some parents, going to the grave is an issue. He gets comfort from going to the grave. We don't go very often because her grave is pretty far from here. It's not a place that we can just drop by. So it's a trip when we go there. But he does get comfort from going there, and I don't. Well, we give each other grace to do what we need to do in that regard. I don't judge him for feeling the way he does. He doesn't judge me for feeling the way I do.
Yeah, that's like with Tristan. I had to have pictures. I wanted to look and gaze over at his face and everything, but that was super painful.
Yeah.
It still is. I can't look at an album of Tristan's pictures.
Yes.
Yeah.
It hurts too much.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I'm glad someone had told me that.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to think something's wrong.
Something's wrong with you. Yeah.
With him, he's not grieving right.
Yeah.
No, that's not it. No.
Yeah.
He's grieving differently.
Yeah.
And the
Not
other
right or
thing I was
wrong.
thinking, that the distinction that's important is that your grief book is going to be a lot longer than what other people expect.
That's right.
Right? And
And
that's,
what
you
other
got to give
people-
yourself permission to have a long grief book.
Yes. And sometimes what other people will have patience for.
Yes, that too.
Yeah. I was so surprised one day
Yeah.
when at church I said, "Oh, he just really wasn't feeling up to come in today."
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, why?" And
Yeah.
I just froze inside, and I thought, and then the wife nudged the husband, and he goes, "Oh."
Yeah.
But I forget that it's not in their sphere
Right.
of daily influence, and so they might not remember.
That's right. And
I probably didn't remember
exactly.
when someone lost someone, and I.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. We.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How are you doing today?
Right.
Oh, wait a minute. I shouldn't have asked them that.
Exactly. That's the hardest question to ask. And it's the most commonly asked question, I think, just asked in social, settings. And it's complicated.
Yes,
It's a
and
hard
I
question
remember
to
not
answer.
wanting to go to church
Yes.
for several months.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why is
Mhm.
because I could not stand the shallow surface, which is fine on a regular basis.
Right.
How are you doing? How you doing? How are
Mhm.
you?
Yeah.
The thought of someone asking me that
Mhm.
made me say, I can't be there to even hear it.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
I totally understand that. I felt the same way.
Mm.
Yes. And just to have the energy to keep up a conversation, because I don't know if this was your experience, but after Hannah died, my mind was just not, I couldn't focus
Yeah.
on one thing for any length of time for a while. I couldn't follow conversation because I was thinking about Hannah,
Mhm.
you know, or thinking about what was going on with our other daughter, you know, and making sure she was okay. I couldn't small
Mhm.
talk for a long
Everyone
small
has a
talk.
clock
Yes.
behind their eyes.
Uh-huh.
And most people have they can listen to things for a lot, depending upon who it is.
Right.
But after grief, your clock is seconds. You know?
Yes.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And all of a sudden, then you're just drifting, and you're like, "What am I doing here? Why am I talking to this person
Right.
about this?" And
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
and it's not like you're being mean or you feeling like they're being mean.
Right.
It's just the nature of who
Right.
you are now, and you're
Right.
trying to.
Yeah.
I think something you said reminded me of this, that um, this having lost a child is like having your entire body demolished
Yeah.
in a massive injury.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got recovery to do. You've got to recuperate. You've got to, retrain those atrophied muscles and
Yeah.
things, because you're not functioning at
Mhm.
all like you used to.
Right.
And it takes a lot of energy to recover, and it
Mm-hmm.
takes a lot of time to recover.
Right.
And you can't have unrealistic expectations
Right.
about what's
And
ahead.
we're never going to fully recover. We're
Yeah.
always going to walk with a limp.
Yep.
You
That's
know,
it.
it's there's always going to be a missing piece
Yeah.
that's not there.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we can't still have a full life.
Right.
It doesn't mean we can't still have joy, because we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it means it's always gonna be tempered
Mhm.
just a little bit.
Mm.
Yeah.
But you know, that gives us a longing for heaven.
Right.
I
Mhm.
think it gives us a longing. It gives us more of an eternal perspective
Yes.
that I didn't have before.
No.
I didn't think about heaven very much, and if I
No.
did, it was like later.
Yeah.
I have a life to live here. I want
That's
to
for
raise my
them.
children. You know, that's grandparents fine,
Yes.
and I'll be there someday. But
Yeah.
I'm not in any hurry.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
You know, now I have a lot more of an eternal focus. Now I love my life here. Again, we have joy.
Mhm.
We have a lot to look forward to still in
Mhm.
this life. We know God still has a purpose for us in this life. So we want to live that out and we want to steward that
Yeah.
well. But hey, when it's my time, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
And we
think
can say that to each other as bereaved parents because we understand.
yes.
Yes.
We know what we're saying.
We have our culture talks a lot about self-awareness. Are you self-aware and this and that? I think as Christians, and I know for myself, before Tristan died, we hear that heaven is blessing and the earth is cursed, right? I didn't have a world awareness of the curse of the earth until Tristan died
Yeah.
and was in heaven. And now I'm living every day in a
Yeah.
broken, cursed earth that I want no part of. I am now really feeling that I am a sojourner and a
Yes.
stranger
Mhm.
on this earth. And I can't wait to get to my real home
Amen.
where my boy is.
Amen.
That's right.
That's a new perspective. And I think, sad to say, you need a tragedy like that to pull your grip off of the consumerism or material, whatever it is, and especially in the Western culture, I'm guessing
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
it's a very Western thing.
Yeah.
You love this earth. You want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
make your kingdom on this earth. You're
Right.
trying to make everything just perfect on this earth. But once Tristan was gone,
Yeah.
Yeah.
all that was just
Yeah.
gone.
Well,
And
I really felt that too. That change in perspective, and then it also the compassion for others,
yes.
understanding their hurt, and it may not be child loss, but when a divorce or they lose a job and their world changes. Obviously, I know a lot about child loss because I've experienced it and I understand that, but that there is hurting people around us. That's back to the broken world we're in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fallen, and and but that perspective be changing for me, and for me, you know, I'm concerned about people's salvation.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to be in heaven with me?
Mm-hmm.
And I should have had that concern before, because I know how fragile life is now,
Yeah.
because we experienced it as
Yeah.
parents, losing with our kids
Right.
going to heaven. But I want to share the hope, not just the hope of eternal life,
Yeah.
but the hope of Jesus
Right.
For this life here.
Yes.
for this life here. Yes.
Yeah.
That's so true.
I felt like when I became a Christian, I knew that the things you do as a Christian, to pray and read your Bible so you can learn more about God and go to church and minister. But I would often hear people say, Jesus is my best friend. And I'd think, I don't know what that feels like. I don't think he is my best friend. And after Tristan died, when I woke up, I thought, I'm not going to be able to stay on this earth unless I go right now and meet with you. You've got to give me something. And opening scripture and seeking God and saying, you know how before you'd have your quiet time and you'd say, okay, I'll read a psalm, and you would read a psalm and then you'd be done. I would open it up and I'd read a psalm and I wouldn't get anything from it, because it'd be one of those psalms that talks about things that just don't hit your heart quite right, or the way, and I'd say, nope. And I'd keep going and I'd keep going and I'd keep going until that's it, God. And it would, like it says, it's sharper than any two-edged sword, and it pierces. And I began to develop a relationship with Jesus as a person, not just my Savior. And he was the friend that met me every day. And I found out, because he's acquainted with men of sorrows, intimately acquainted with grief. He gets it. He knows that feeling because he's had it. And it made me feel close to him, just like a real best friend that you're close to because you've shared experiences and you talk together a lot. My whole relationship changed with Jesus after this, after Tristan went to see him.
You know, even professionally, as an educator, my focus changed. You know, I saw the people I worked with as a school administrator and as a superintendent. You know, I saw them differently. And the other thing, as an educator, you know, you're brought up as an educator. You know, education opened doors here on earth.
Yeah.
Society tells you you need a degree,
Yeah.
a high school diploma, you need post-secondary training.
Yeah.
That's all important.
Yeah.
But how that changed for me, the most important thing is Jesus.
Yeah.
And what have you done with him?
Mm.
Is he your best friend?
Mm.
Is he your Lord? Have you trusted him as your Savior?
Yeah.
And that will open up the door of heaven for eternity.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
And that changed for me. And
Wow.
and that was this perspective after Hannah went to heaven. And as been a Christian all my life since I was very small, but that perspective changed.
Yeah.
I want to fulfill God's purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And be who he wants me to be, and be obedient with whatever he puts in front of me.
Yeah.
And I want to make a difference. I want to live well.
I felt an immediate purpose, not in some big plan or something, but I remember having two feelings. One was, this earth is so hard to live on. When Tristan is in heaven, it's really, really hard to live here. God, I wish that you'd come back and take all of us with you.
Amen.
That was very strong.
Yeah.
And then the second one was, if I ever figure out how to get through this, there's nothing there. I have got to tell other people how they're going to get through this. Did you have a strong, how soon did that hit you? A purpose, like, we've got to like fill in the blank.
Right. Very soon, and a lot of that was from Hannah's prayer, for a storm that God would use her. We wanted her storm we wanted something to come from her storm. We felt like if she had to endure the suffering that she endured,
Yes.
there's got to be good come from it. There has to be some good come from it. And within just a few weeks of her going to heaven, we were already beginning to think about a retreat for bereaved parents and how valuable that could be. Because it was very early on that, like he said, we started seeking out other bereaved parents. I mean, we could see the value in that. And it wasn't until we actually attended a retreat for bereaved parents that we saw the concept in action and how beautiful it was. And really felt like God was calling us to do something like that. And that's how While We're Waiting was born. And there's just something beautiful about parents that have lost children getting together, strangers, who have all different kinds of loss. The retreat that we attended, the original one, there were people there from 11 different states in Canada. And all of our stories were very different. It was from infant loss to drownings to cancer to suicide to car accidents, everything you could imagine, all different ages. But it didn't matter because the pain was the same. Even though the stories were different, the pain was the same. And we bonded with those parents. We're still in touch with a lot of those parents today. And so that's what happens at the retreats that we host is we get these parents together and they're nervous when they come in on Friday evening. Nobody wants to come to a bereaved parent retreat.
We were.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember being scared. Are
Yeah.
you sure you want to do this?
Hey,
we can't cancel now, can we?
Right.
What would happen if we did cancel?
Yeah. We have parents that tell us that they drive past the driveway and it's like, well, we're in Hot Springs, Arkansas. We could go, to a nice hotel and just have a little vacation weekend. Nobody will know the difference. But they usually make it down the driveway after, they might pass it a couple of times, but they come on down. And they're always so glad they did.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you walk in the door, you just feel that embrace of others who understand. And it doesn't take long at all to settle in.
I think they really need to understand that you've experienced the most cataclysmic, unfathomably cataclysmic thing you could imagine. You're not going to do this alone.
No.
And if you try to do it alone, you deserve what you get in a
Yeah.
sense, because we're made together as a body, and other Christian parents have suffered the same thing. Why wouldn't you run to find those people to help
and
you?
to have a community.
They've been there and they can walk you through that and give you the comfort you need. And you're going to get some people who are just going to not say anything and put their arms around you and hug you. And that's what we need so much. And just that compassion and then the understanding and being able to speak wisdom because they've walked the road that other people haven't walked. You can't counsel somebody if you haven't walked that road, because I guess you could to a certain degree, but you're not going to have that depth.
I was an extrovert before Tristan went to heaven. So the thought of attending a gathering was no problem at all. But after Tristan went to heaven, I felt so raw and vulnerable and not knowing when I was going to cry, when I wanted to just run to my room and hide. And the thought of coming into a place with complete strangers with this raw wound was not appealing.
Right.
But pushing through that on faith and saying, let's just see what happens. And I was an extrovert, so I can imagine if it was an introvert who hates gatherings anyway, it would be so much harder for them.
Yes.
But it's almost like, well, I've lost the worst thing in the world.
Right.
What could happen that could make it worse? So just to come into the retreat, that's all I needed to do. The people that greeted me, instantly, I knew I was in the right place. So, and from there on, it just got better and better and better every hour.
Yeah.
And I left 100% sold that
Yeah.
everyone should go.
Yeah. Well, and I believe you attended one of our retreats in Georgia.
Yes.
Tennessee.
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 It was Tennessee, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know.
Right. Right. Yeah. We have retreats all over the country now. We always thought we would just do retreats in Arkansas, and God has seen fit to expand this ministry to multiple states around the country. And, we're so grateful for that because, not everybody can get on an airplane and come to Arkansas. So, we've got these other locations. And then I can imagine, you said, even as an extrovert, it was scary to come in there. I would imagine that the thought of coming to a retreat when your story is suicide might be even more difficult. And that's one reason we now have retreats that are suicide specific, where parents that have lost a child to suicide can come to a gathering that's everyone's story. Now, they're welcome to come. We have parents that have lost children to suicide come to our mixed group retreats all the time, and they do great.
Yes.
And we learn from them,
Mm-hmm.
just like they learn from us. But I think there's great value in those who share your story to be able to talk about some things some extra burdens that maybe we, having lost a child to cancer, don't carry
Yes.
and don't understand.
Yes. Yes. I'm so thankful. We had signed up for a regular retreat.
Uh-huh.
And I think I even remember talking to you about it. And you said, yes, and you'll do fine here. And
Yeah.
then you said, but you might prefer. And so we actually switched from a regular to a suicide specific retreat. I would recommend that too. You can do both.
Right.
Yeah,
You can come to
absolutely.
both. Yeah. Mhm.
It just hit me that we're talking to you and from while we're waiting that God gave you a ministry that ministers to people across the country, coast to coast. And that's your full-time job now, running that ministry. And our family is making a documentary on child loss. Our whole family is filming it together.
Yeah.
We're committed to that. And there may be someone watching this video that is just little old me. I don't know how to do that. I don't want to do that. What would we say to them?
And God has a purpose for everyone. But, early on in those early days of grief, early days, months, weeks, months, even into the first year or two, your purpose may just be getting up and taking a shower that day. We have to have grace to give ourselves that. A lot of parents are looking for purpose after the loss of a child. And you may not know what your purpose is for a while. And in that intermediate time, just taking care of yourself, taking a shower, cooking a meal, those are Herculean tasks early on. People might be surprised to hear that, but that is the case. Any bereaved parent knows that. For you, if you have other children in your home, your purpose is raising those children, is parenting those children. You're parenting, you are broken as a parent, and you're parenting a bunch of broken children. And so that's going to take everything you've got in you for a while. And that may be your purpose, is just parenting for a while. Elizabeth Elliot talks about just doing the next right thing. And so you don't have to look off into the future. What's my purpose in the future? It's what's my purpose today? What's my next right thing that God has put in front of me?
Keep it simple.
And keep it simple.
Yes.
It may be sending somebody a text. Somebody, a bereaved parent friend that you know, that it's their child's birthday that day. Or it's graduation night and you realize you have a friend that lost a child who should be graduating that night. Send them a text. Write them a card. Those seem like small things, but they're huge to the person who receives them. So that may be your purpose for a while. We have people that we know, one lady in particular, God has given her a ministry of writing cards. And she went to one of our early While We're Waiting events, and she just kind of watches the obituaries and watches when somebody about her son's age dies, and she will write their parents a note. And in that note, I don't know what she writes in these cards, but it must be really good. She will write a wonderful note, and then a couple weeks later, she follows it up with a second note that includes a While We're Waiting brochure. and she tells them about the retreats. And I cannot tell you how many people we have had who have registered. And on the registration form, it says, "How did you hear about While We're Waiting?" And it'll say, "I received a card from a woman in Arkansas." Or, "I received a card in the mail from somebody named Deborah." And we just go, "There you go, Deborah." The thing that she's doing, she's just writing a card. But it has huge ramifications for the people who receive those cards. Come to a retreat, and even if they never come to a retreat, it gives them hope for another day. So
And I think this daily obedience is
yes,
important
yeah,
because as a bereaved parent, we're on a platform. People are watching us,
that's right.
and
Whether we want them to or not.
and to strive to live well and to live a life that's going to point others to Christ. Oh man, what an impact that will have. And we've seen that too. Just the life that you live, you're sharing the gospel, and you may not have to share the gospel and say this is the gospel in from the Bible, but you're living the gospel, and how powerful that is. And just a reminder to parents that people are watching, and God can use you and how you live.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's like we have a platform of attention that we never had before.
Right.
And
Not
we
a
don't realize
platform
it's
we would have
there.
ever sought, but yeah,
oh,
yeah,
Once, one Sunday, I can't sing at church unless I cry. I'm gonna
Yeah.
cry.
yes.
And one of the women on the worship team came up to me and she said, "I just need to let you know, I see you crying on Sundays." I said, "I know, I'm sorry." She says, "No, no, no. I want you to know that your example in grief has meant something to me because I lost my father. When I lost my father, I did not do it well.
mhm.
Wow.
I never would have known."
Yeah.
Mm.
So God was using you in a way that you would have never even known.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that as bereaved parents, it's almost up to us to educate other people.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we didn't ask for that, but that can help other people and how they respond, and to help them to understand. Because sometimes our culture doesn't allow us to understand, because we're just, you should be all better. You're crying while you're singing. What?
Right.
And I could go to church like you, and you sing about heaven, and it's emotional.
Yeah.
I've got someone there,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking forward to going there, and it's emotional. And it's not like I'm back at day one.
Yeah.
It's just and it's tears of hopeful tears.
Yeah.
I'm grateful when we sing about the old rugged cross. It's emotional.
Mm-hmm.
When we sing about the empty tomb, it's emotional. When we sing about the gift of the Christ child, it's emotional. Because of that, I have hope.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we have to educate people. And it should have been emotional before my daughter went to heaven.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
I should have been grateful and thankful for all of those that we often sing about, and in the scripture what it says.
Yeah. Isn't it weird that something so horrible, so awful in your life rendered gifts?
Yeah.
Yes.
The gift of being so much more closer to Jesus, so much more longing for heaven and wanting to be in his will and not being able to live without him.
Mm-hmm.
Those are gifts. I wouldn't have wanted to get him this way.
I wonder if it has something to do with the purpose. I was just thinking about this as you were talking. We parents want this purpose, and we say, keep it small, keep it simple. And part of that is, perhaps you tell me if this is true or not, because you've talked to a lot more parents than I have, but it's almost like God has cut off a monstrous chunk out of your life.
Yeah.
And so what you have left, you've got more attention on that. And so you're able to filter out things that are not necessary anymore. You're also paying more attention to other people, and you're more sensitive to what they're going through and experiencing. And so it's almost like you get this laser vision that you didn't have before. And you're able to enjoy those smaller, simpler things, because those smaller, simpler things are much more important. They're more magnified in your life. It's like somebody who hasn't, so, I don't know, they haven't eaten for a year, and now they've got a plate of potatoes. It's like, those are the best potatoes I've ever had in my life. Is this, you savor what little you have, and you enjoy that and just live in that, rather than, for me, like, I'm always the one, when something happens or I get this dream, I'm out there, I want the whole thing, I'm going to go out. But you have to close that in, and that's what grief does. I think when you lose a child, is you start looking at the smaller, simpler things, and you've got a focused perspective that you didn't have before. Like, being thankful with those songs because you had Hannah. Now that you don't have it, now it's bigger. What is, maybe it's something like that. So I see you shaking your head. You're not, I mean, not in your head. It's,
Yeah. Well, and we even experienced that some before Hannah died, because when you're living with a child that has a terminal illness, you make the most of every moment, because you don't know when they're going to end. You want to be fully present and fully experiencing every moment with that child.
that's it.
That presence. And we should live that way all the time, because we knew, I mean, barring a miracle, we knew she was going to be leaving us. So we consciously made a very conscious choice to live that way. But, anybody could leave us at any time. So we should live that way all the time, soaking in those little moments, those little things, and reveling in them.
Yes, I like that, being present, focusing on it. That's so good.
One other thing about our purpose and Western culture would make us believe that it's to obtain wealth and things and status.
Achieve big things, bigger, better.
Yes. For me, it'd be a big school superintendent to finish my doctorate, and that didn't matter. But that change of perspective to eternal things and to the hope of Christ, and how am I going to live the rest of my life? Sure, I could be a big school superintendent. For what? To really, and I'm still, I got skin on. I'm still sinning. I'm a sinful man, but it's changed the way. I'm not perfect. Is the point I'm making. But I want to strive to focus on things that really matter.
Right.
And with that being said, that's what gives me. It helps me, sustains me in this grief journey. This matters. Sharing Christ or loving on someone that's hurting, that matters. Pointing them to Jesus, who is the ultimate help, matters. Being a big school superintendent, yes, in this world it might be status. It may give me my bank account more money, but that really don't matter. So, and that's helped me to focus on what really matters, and that's in other areas of my life as well.
You gave me a confidence. I remember being in the airport, flying home after I heard our house had burned. And I had just a strange confidence to speak to people I was interacting with and say, yeah, my house just burned. And they'd say, oh, no, that's awful. I'd say, I lost a son. Right. So what is a house?
That's right.
And in some cases, I was able to actually carry that conversation through, which was my hope in all of them, but it didn't always work, to share the gospel.
Yeah.
And before the thought of sharing the gospel to a stranger at the airport, how am I going to do that? How am I going to bring it up? None of that. I just, it takes away all self-awareness because it doesn't matter anymore. I have
Right.
a son in heaven.
Yeah.
That's all that matters.
That's
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
Where did it change for you? How long after Hannah had gone to heaven did you feel the shift? Or was there a shift? Was it a long shift? Was it a corner? What was that?
That's
I think it was very gradual
Yes.
for me, and I do think for me personally, it was after that first year into the second, that I began to feel better. I don't know if better is the right word, but maybe less weighted down, less heavy. As I said earlier, that's not always the case for everyone. That was for me. I have wondered before, because we knew that Hannah was dying, we did a lot of grieving before she died. And I've wondered before if that makes the heaviness of the aftermath grief maybe lift a little sooner than someone whose child dies suddenly and has so much shock, that they have to process before they can even begin to process the grief. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. But for me, I think it was not long after the first year. Not that it got immediately better, but that there was a shift. That 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 it wasn't quite as heavy to carry. What would you say?
I would think that I really sensed a change when we were more involved in seeking out others, and when the ministry started, and we got to started to see how God was using our story to help someone else, and then in that process we were being helped, and the more of the focus that I could take off me, that helped me to move forward a little faster. I mean, and I'm still not there. I mean, that's where I really saw things change, is when we really when God really gave us that direction as far as while we're waiting. Well, when we met Larry and Janice Brown, and probably that point on, it really started to. They were catalyst in our lives. God used them, and as we come together, and just the ministry was birthed, and to start seeing, and then to see God work and focus on that, and also it helped me to relate back to my, Hannah's illness, and before she got sick, to what God was doing, and how His sovereign hand was directing our path, and because of that, a guy that sang at our wedding sang it at her funeral. We bought a house next to a retired pastor that had impacted us greatly, but really to rest in God's sovereignty, and to realize, God, you had me, you have me, and you're going to have me. And that, when I could really wrap my head around that, and that helped me, and it's a lot of that goes back to trust, and going back to Scripture. What does the Bible say?
A lot of the Psalms are like that. You had me, you have me, and you will have me. If you look at the structure of many of those laments.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about reaching a point or a place of submission and acceptance of what's happened. I think sometimes we want to be angry. We want to fight and say, no, I'm not going to accept this. This is not going to be my life. I know it happened. I can't change that, but I am not going to accept it. And as long as we stay in that position, we're not going to improve. we're not going to be able to move forward. But I think when we get to the point where we can submit, where we can let go and say, okay, I'm going to give this to God. I accept God's sovereignty in my life, and that this, as much as I hate it, this is my life. And this is what God has sovereignly allowed to happen in my life. When we can get to from this posture to this posture, that's where there's a shift.
For me, I recognized I was dwelling so much on the night of the death and the death and Tristan being taken. I acknowledged that God took him away, and it was God's timing, and God was the boss. I wasn't the boss.
Right.
I was willing to accept that. But God showed me, I was saying, he's gone, he's gone, he's gone. God said, but he was such a gift. And then I thought, I shouldn't focus on the fact that he's gone. I should focus on, oh, I was so lucky. I use the word lucky, but when I say it, I mean blessed. I was so lucky to have him. I can't believe you gave me such a boy. And that turned it from just drenched sorrow to little bit of spikes of sunshine coming out of the cracks of joy. Like, he was a gift from you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
What advice would you give a church about what a newly bereaved parent needs from them? What would a pastor need to know about that? Because you've counseled hundreds, if not thousands, of people, and you've seen and heard stories about how churches have either helped them or not been there to support them. So you've got a lot of a wealth of knowledge there. So if you had to say one or two things to a church or church leaders, what would that be?
For me, one of the first things I would tell them is that they need to know, they need to be aware that church is one of the hardest places for a bereaved parent to be. You mentioned that earlier about the thought of walking into church and people asking, "How are you?" was enough to keep you away for a long time. I had a very hard time going back to church, and it was because of that. I didn't know how to answer the questions. I didn't know how to respond to people giving me sympathy and saying kind things to me. Those were wonderful things, but I was afraid of just the emotional outburst that I was most likely going to have in response to that. And so church was very hard for me to go back to. It's very hard to sit through the worship service. I should speak for myself. It was very hard for me to sit through the worship service. Songs that that contain lyrics like "He's never going to let me down," or our worship songs tend to be very praise oriented, which is great. They should be. I mean, they are worship songs, but there's very little lament in worship. There's very little that a bereaved parent can relate to in worship, unless the song is about heaven or that kind of thing. Most of the songs in our church are happy, and that's not where we are. It's not where I was. That's for sure. And so it was very hard for me to go back to church. A lot of times churches expect a bereaved parent to just kind of pick back up where they left off. Maybe they were on the worship team, and you might get a couple of months grace, and then they want to know, when are you going to be singing with us again? Or when are you going to be teaching Sunday school again? Or when are you going to start volunteering in the nursery again? And those may be things we're not able to pick back up. Not now, and maybe not ever. And that's okay. I think those are important things for people to be aware of. I think that pastors need to be aware that a bereaved parent who is coming back into church is not going to be satisfied swimming in the shallow end of the theological pool anymore.
Mhm. 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 Mhm.
And I couldn't listen to shallowness.
Yeah. I don't have any patience for it.
No,
Mm.
no. I just wanted to go deep. And a lot of churches, a lot of Sunday school classes are just not really equipped for that.
Yeah.
And so you can feel like a real misfit. What's wrong with me? Everybody else is, happy and satisfied. And, you know, I was not there anymore.
Yeah.
It's like you have precious skin in the game now.
Yes.
Yeah.
You cannot
Yes.
go back.
Right.
Todd,
Yeah.
recently
You
had
can't go
a,
back to that innocence,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
naivety that you had before.
Yeah.
to answer your question, recently we had a retreat. We had 2 pastors there that had lost children.
Mhm.
And one of the pastors he was almost retirement age. And someone asked him as a part of the retreat in conversation, would you do things differently if you were 30 instead of 60 when your son went to heaven? He said, it would have changed my ministry.
Mhm.
And I'm not trying to throw rocks at our pastors, but sometimes they really don't understand. And just to encourage your church, and it may be left up to you to help educate your church
Yeah.
on your needs, but to seek those out. And I know we've had pastors here that would going forward in their days, their passion, their purpose, they want to help churches help people. Because I think some churches are doing an outstanding job.
Yes.
And then some churches are,
And I think all of them try.
oh, yes.
Everybody means well.
Yeah.
But
And he said, I remember a pastor saying one time, he said, over the years, I've done funerals for parents, for children and sat across the table or on the couch with a mom and dad. And, I thought I was saying the right things. And I wish I could have a redo.
Yeah.
Because I really didn't get it. And so, some of those conversations we've been a part of has really enlightened us on there's a need for churches to be more equipped to help us. And I think it's just being intentional about that. And I would encourage churches and parents to communicate about those needs.
yeah, you may need to meet with your pastor
Yeah.
and just kind of fill them in. And let me just say one other thing. Youth pastors, Sunday school teachers need to be aware that child's siblings
Yes.
are going to be struggling mightily, whether they're teenagers or children, and that they need to just be sensitive to that.
Even at church, they'll run to the kids and say, "Well, how's your mom doing?"
Yeah.
And
Don't ask our children how we're doing. Ask them how they're doing.
Yeah.
That's good.
well, mom and dad seem to be doing okay, but I'm a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll never say that to
No.
anybody. That's so true.
Yeah.
If we go back to what you were talking about with the pastors who would redo it over, I've been trying to process the Psalms. Why don't we sing the Psalms in church? And I've been thinking a lot about that. And it's odd that we have the pastors, they're so interested in the exegesis of the passage and getting all the details out of it. And let's mine what this means. And yet they can do that and miss the heart of the Psalms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the reason they're not applying to the Psalms what the Psalms is saying, because the Psalms is saying, here's brokenness. This is what brokenness looks like. This is what it looks like when you're you feel forsaken of God. You feel like he's not answering. And I think we tend to overlook all that. And had we had a history in our church of singing the Psalms on a regular basis, these would be ingrained in our minds. And over years of singing, we would have that reference point where we could minister to somebody who's broken.
Right.
Be hidden in your heart.
Yeah. So we are hurting ourselves by not singing the Psalms in church anymore.
Or even addressing lament from the pulpit.
Yes.
You know, I've never heard a sermon about lament.
No.
And, you know, that's, of course, being in grief work, I've started kind of collecting those kinds of books. And hopefully the church is becoming more aware of that. And I think they are. It just takes a while to filter in.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys so much for this time and sharing your stories and the lessons you've learned. You guys are a wealth of information and guidance and wisdom. And we're so grateful to have you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a blessing to us to be able to share.
Yes. Thank you.